All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, wherever you are. We're really excited to present this Beyond Awareness Preventing Teen Dating Violence in Schools presentation to you today. We're recording it in January 2021 because we're getting ready for Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month in February. So throughout this presentation, we're hoping that you'll walk away with some tips and tools for practically doing prevention in your communities with your schools. And let's get started. So, Bree.
Yes, hi, my name is Bree Sugano. I use she, her, and hers pronouns, and I'm a Prevention and Community Engagement Specialist with the Center for Community Solutions.
And my name is Sabrina Van Zuden. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm also a Prevention and Community Engagement Specialist with Center for Community Solutions. CCS is a San Diego-based nonprofit that serves survivors of sexual violence, relationship violence, and stalking. Bree and I work in the prevention department, and we're so excited to be offering you this training on behalf of the Teen Dating Violence Committee of the San Diego Domestic Violence Council.
One note before we get started is we just want to acknowledge that we are talking about teen dating violence and violence prevention, which means we are going to be covering some sensitive topics and they affect everyone differently. So make sure to prioritize self-care. I know this is a recording, so you can definitely step out whenever you need to, no pressure. So whatever you need to do to get through this presentation or whatever makes you feel good, make sure to do so. All right.
So some background on the Teen Dating Violence Committee. We're part of the San Diego Domestic Violence Council. We are an interdisciplinary team, and we have members from Health and Human Services, nonprofits like Center for Community Solutions, and other great organizations in the San Diego area. Folks from education, San Diego County Office of Ed is one of our great partners. A quick shout out to Violeta Mora from there, who helped us present this in person on January 13th to different school partners throughout the community. We also have folks from law enforcement and general community partners who are invested in teen dating violence prevention and awareness. So our goal as a committee is to increase awareness, prevention, and education around TDV in the San Diego County. An overview of what we're going to discuss in the next hour or so is we're going to have a shared definition of what is teen dating violence. We're going to define the social ecological model, which is going to make sense in about 15 minutes or so. And we're going to identify opportunities for prevention at each level of the social ecological model.
So to get started, we're going to be defining a relationship. So as you can see, there's a lot of different things that a relationship can mean. And it's important that we acknowledge this because when we think of a relationship or when we think of relationship violence, we often assume that that relationship that we're referring to basically means dating or maybe married, but it can actually mean a lot more things beyond that. And it's important that we recognize this because otherwise we might not know how to recognize TDV, teen dating violence, when we see it in other kinds of relationships besides, formal dating. And it also helps us to break down that myth that if someone is experiencing relationship violence, that they can just leave the relationship and then everything's fine. Because we know that a relationship can include formerly dating. So somebody may have already left that relationship and can still experience dating violence. We know that it may not have ever been a relationship, right? A formal relationship, like just hooking up, just talking, went on a date one time. Those can all fall into this category of a relationship and can all experience relationship violence. So now we want to define what violence can look like. So the Teen Dating Violence Committee collaborated to create this definition. Teen dating violence is a pattern of violent, coercive, or manipulative behaviors to gain power and maintain control over another person in a relationship. Abuse can happen online or in person and includes physical, sexual, emotional, verbal, financial violence, and stalking. And I mentioned power and control in that definition. So let's talk about power and control. It's really important that we understand this because relationship violence is not defined by the presence of physical violence, but by the presence of power and control, which can show up physically, but also in these other ways, that as we see on this power and control wheel. And so when we think of relationship violence, a lot of us think of physical, maybe also you might think of sexual or emotional and verbal, but a lot of times we aren't as familiar with these social identity, cultural types of violence, or financial and economic. And those can look a lot of different ways. Economic and financial might look like expecting one partner to always pay for dates or provide gifts or support the other partner. And of course, that would be in a situation where that wasn't consensually agreed to by both partners, or was coerced in some way. And there's a lot of different examples. We have some handouts that we will share in a folder. You'll get the link to that at the end of the presentation, that really expands on what all the different parts of this power and control wheel can look like in coercive or abusive relationships, and also examples of what the opposite of that would look like in healthy relationships.
So we're going to talk a little bit about risk factors, and these risk factors come from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, and these risk factors mean that the presence of this list in someone's life leads to a greater likelihood that they themselves would cause harm, or they themselves would be a perpetrator of teen dating violence. And risk factors can include history of physical violence in the home. And so either the young person witnessing it between two other people or multiple people in the home, or experiencing it themselves. Other risk factors include adherence to traditional gender norms, excessive alcohol use, risky sexual behavior, which can include not knowing the physical location you're at when you're having sex. It can include having sex while under the influence of substances, and it can include not using contraceptives or protection during sex. Risk factors can also include things like poverty or low socioeconomic status, exposure to community crime and violence, social norms that are supportive of sexual violence, and weak laws and policies related to sexual violence. I want to point out first that this is not an exhaustive list of risk factors. The CDC has many more and lists many more risk factors. This is just what we could fit on our slide and what we thought might be most pertinent to you all as you're thinking of preventing TDV in schools. Something else I want to point out on this slide is that some of these risk factors exist on an individual level, right? An individual would either witness or experience violence in the home. An individual may adhere to traditional gender norms. But on this list, there are also things that are community issues and societal issues, like community crime and violence, social norms that support sexual violence, poverty or low SES. Those are not individual choices that someone makes, right? That's a community and societal experience. So as we go through the presentation, we're really challenging you to think of teen dating violence, relationship violence, sexual violence, not just as an individual experience, as many do. Many folks consider these types of violence to be things that happen behind closed doors, things that happen just to individuals. But what we know for prevention and for intervention and supporting survivors is that it goes beyond that individual experience. There's a community and a societal experience with this as well. And those are opportunities for intervention and prevention. So some protective factors. So just as the presence of risk factors increases the likelihood that someone would cause harm, protective factors increase the likelihood that somebody would not cause harm. And on this list, we have high friendship quality, connection and commitment to school, social support, which can mean tangible help or connection to a caring adult, community support, which can mean community cohesiveness, so the sense of a belonging to a community that's willing to intervene when they see someone being harmed, a community where there's a culture of support and connectedness and mutual trust. And then another one is coordination of resources and services among community agencies. And at the TDV committee, at the San Diego Domestic Violence Council, that's what we're really trying to get at here, is making sure that the support systems and the community agencies who do the work are coordinating their services so that we can best serve our community members who are reaching out for support. And again, really quick, if we could go back, yeah, just again, these protective factors exist on the individual level, this high friendship quality, connection to school, but it also exists on the community and societal levels as well. So this is the social ecological model. And this is the inside scoop, I want to say, on how preventionists approach prevention. So this is originally, it's a public health model, and it's a way to think of public health as not just an individual experience, but something that happens to individuals in relationships amongst small groups of folks, in communities, and at the societal level as well. So when I explain the social ecological model, which I call SEM for short, I like to use the example of asthma to just sort of get started thinking about what does this mean. So let's say we have a young person who is diagnosed with asthma. On the individual level, we're going to support and treat that individual by providing them with an inhaler, making sure that they have access to the medications they need, making sure that they know what to do when they're having an asthma attack, educating at the individual level. And then let's zoom out a little bit further to the relationship level. Maybe that young person with asthma actually has 2 other siblings who also have asthma. So now we're going to think about this as a family unit. So how are we going to support this family? How are we going to make sure that the parents and guardians know what to do during an asthma attack? Maybe we're going to connect them to the hospital's medical social worker to make sure that they have the insurance to pay for the care that they're going to need. We're going to treat that as a family unit. If we zoom back out further, we might find, wow, this community in particular, this neighborhood, has higher rates of asthma than the general population. Okay, so with that information, then maybe we're going to offer more community clinics. We're going to offer more opportunities to sign up for healthcare. We're going to do informational sessions. We're going to spread information about how to handle asthma, et cetera. And if we zoom out even further at the societal level, what we might find is that maybe there are laws that are allowing certain factories in the area to pollute the air at higher rates than the other populations would be exposed to. And so that societal level policy is enabling, enabling this pollution of the air, which is causing higher rates in this neighborhood of asthma, which is the reason why all of these siblings have asthma in this family unit, which is the reason why that one individual needed to go in and get treatment in the first place. So just really drawing out all of it as interconnected. And, when we think of things like teen dating violence, intimate partner violence, sexual violence, it's the same. An individual could experience an instance of violence, and that experience is tied to their relationships, it's tied to their community, and it's tied to the societal level actions and policies and culture that allow for this type of violence to happen. So this is an opportunity, just as the violence is experienced at all of these levels, it's an opportunity for people who intervene at all of these levels, and it's an opportunity for people to prevent at all of these levels. So as we look at how do we prevent teen dating violence, we have to make sure that we're intervening at each level.
So now we have a kind of an understanding of teen dating violence, what is dating in a relationship, what is violence, and then where does violence occur at all these different levels. And we want to start thinking about how to prevent now at all these different levels. So we want to think about how you've been taught to prevent sexual or relationship violence in the past. Now, these things that we've all been taught in the past, we're bringing them up to draw kind of a difference between some of the common forms of prevention that people think of and the kind of prevention we want to start moving towards. So when I think of ways that I've been taught to prevent sexual violence in the past for myself is things like keeping my hand over my drink if I'm, at a party or at a bar, like so that way no one puts drugs in my drink, I put my hand over it. Or maybe walking to my car if I'm walking alone with my keys between my fingers, so that way I can, defend myself if I need to. I've definitely, as a young person, been encouraged to take self-defense classes to protect myself if I was ever attacked by a stranger or something like that. So many different ones. Sabrina, do you have any that you want to share?
Yeah, I think some common ones that I was taught when I was younger, and again, just what we were taught, not necessarily what we're promoting, is,
Right.
I was taught, don't go out alone. Make sure you always have a group, use the buddy system. Another was make sure you don't dress promiscuously, wear
Mm-hmm.
these types of clothing as if that's what prevents violence.
Right. And also, I want to note that I think some of the things that you and I have both been saying have been a little bit more geared towards sexual violence prevention than relationship violence. And so, but we get similar messaging, I think, around relationship violence. Things like, just leave the relationship if you ever see any, red flags or like actual instances of abuse. I think that's one of the most common ones we hear. You're like, oh, you'll never be in a relationship like that because if you saw that, you would just leave. And so that's a really common one. And along with all these other ones that maybe are specific to sexual violence or maybe kind of apply to both, because I think we see a lot of overlap in the messaging we get about those two. So let's start to unpack some of those messages we've been getting. A lot of those messages, pretty much all of the ones we just said, are actually risk reduction. Risk reduction is or are methods to reduce the likeliness that you will experience violence, right? So risk reduction kind of works under the assumption that violence is going to happen because it's unstoppable. It's just going to happen. It's in the world. So how do I protect myself, right? Because learning self-defense or carrying keys between my fingers or things like that, it doesn't stop someone who wants to act in violence from doing that. It just maybe stops them from doing that to me. Now, that's not really the kind of prevention we want to work towards today. I do want to acknowledge that if you do any of those things and they make you feel more safe, that's great. That's fine. We are not saying that those are bad things to do. We are just saying that that's not really preventing violence on these different levels that Sabrina was just telling us about in the social ecological model. So we want to focus today on primary prevention. Prevention, excuse me, aims to reduce the overall likelihood that anyone will become a victim or perpetrator of violence by creating conditions that make violence less likely to occur. So really focusing on the difference with risk reduction, the likeliness that you or one person will experience violence versus primary prevention is trying to decrease the likelihood that anyone would experience violence or perpetrate violence, right? So risk reduction, those things that we just talked about, some examples, and then we are going to spend the rest of the presentation giving examples of what we can do to engage in primary prevention. And one more thing I wanted to add actually about risk reduction and primary prevention is that risk reduction, although like I said, if you do any of those things to make you feel safe, is totally fine. But also risk reduction as a model of prevention kind of promotes victim blaming, right? Because victim blaming is the idea that it is the person who experienced violence, it's their fault that violence occurred. And we do not stand for that in a space, right? It is never the victim's fault that they experienced violence. And risk reduction sometimes places that responsibility on the victim a little bit more, because it's like, if you didn't defend yourself, if you didn't use the buddy system, if you didn't carry pepper spray in your purse or, whatever it may be, then it almost puts that responsibility on the victim in a way that is just completely inappropriate. So engaging in risk reduction, if it makes you feel safe, okay, but teaching risk reduction as the only way to prevent violence, that's not what we're going to do today. We're going to expand our lens much bigger to start thinking about prevention at all those different levels of the social ecological model. So starting with individual level prevention. So individual level prevention is really when we start to shift our attitudes and beliefs tied to risk factors. So if you remember from that slide on risk factors, we talked about strict adherence to gender roles as a risk factor for perpetrating violence, right? And that's because sometimes people use nonconformity to gender roles as an excuse to harm a partner. Remember that there's never an excuse to harm a partner. And we know that sometimes people see it that way and act accordingly, right? So that's one of the reasons that we really want to shift our attitudes away from that. If we expand our understanding of gender and gender identity and gender expression, and we never penalize people for not conforming to those societal expectations of gender, then that is a way to prevent violence. So that's just one example, and there's so many different ways we can shift our attitudes and beliefs tied to risk factors. We also want to start having the tough conversations. We created a how to start the combo conversation guide, which I will show you now. And this is because it's really important to have these conversations with the young people in our lives, whether that means a peer or your child that you care for, or maybe a student if you're a school staff person. So here's our Start the Combo guide. It gives some just really general open-ended questions that you can use to start talking to the young people in your life about healthy relationships and start to grow those protective factors and reduce the risk factors. So you can see a few examples here, and we also have on the Start the Combo guide some more specific conversation starters and tips for the case in which someone discloses to you that they have experienced sexual or relationship violence. So this first page is a little bit more open that you can use for any young person. It doesn't have to be because you suspect they're experiencing violence. It's always important to talk to young people about healthy relationships. That's why it's prevention and not, a reaction to something. But we also do know that violence does happen, unfortunately, and that's why we also included some tips on how to talk to someone if they have disclosed that they are experiencing violence.
And Bree, if I could just do a quick plug, just for everyone who's watching, we are going to give you a link at the end of this presentation, and that link will take you to a folder that includes these slides with all of the clickable links in them and all the handouts that we're talking about. So you will have access to them even though you're watching a recording of us talk about it.
Yes, everything linked and every handout we talk about will all be in that folder, including this slide deck itself. So another way to shift attitudes and beliefs and do that individual level prevention is to promote and engage with prevention resources. So I want to highlight some websites that we have on here that are resources for education. These have resources for students, for parents, for other caregivers, school staff, any of the above. They're pretty easy to sort if you click through these links. And because it can be really difficult sometimes to approach this topic if you've never really engaged with it before. We totally acknowledge that, and you don't have to start from scratch. There are so many resources out there, whether you are looking for a full lesson plan, just a fun little activity, handouts, anything like that. All of this stuff is available on these websites. And you can look through those to educate yourself or to help educate a classroom, a student, a young person. We also really recommend engaging with preventionist social media. And this is also really great for some of the young people who may be in the audience here or the young people in your life, because it's a lot easier sometimes to learn about new topics in little bite-sized pieces instead of attending a whole lecture or something like that. So here we have some Instagrams that we really recommend. A few of the Instagrams featured here are from organizations represented on the Teen Dating Violence Committee. So you can check these out. They have great youth-oriented content focusing on healthy relationships and consent, unpacking gender norms, all kinds of stuff like that we've been talking about today. We also highlighted a few TikTok accounts that cover similar topics, and also this YouTube channel that we found called Amaze.org. I'm going to show you that right now. And Amaze.org, I think, is really great because they just have all kinds of short, quick informational videos that cover related topics. So here's their playlist called Healthy Relationships, which I just thought was super relevant to our conversation today. It covers things like how to deal with rejection, how to resolve conflict, overviews of intimate partner violence, all kinds of healthy relationships topics that you can share with somebody, so that way they don't have to do all this research. It's super compact right here to make it easy for you.
And that would be great for any teachers who are looking to bring, you have 2 minutes at the beginning of class, you want to do something for Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month, so you just pull up a short 2-minute video, put it up, have a short 5-minute discussion about it, and then that in itself is doing something.
Absolutely.
So on to number 2, our relationship level prevention. So moving along the social ecological model now. So when we're talking about relationship level prevention, we're talking about engaging each other in pairs or small groups And we're making sure that all of our own relationships, whether they are professional or romantic or sexual or platonic, familial relationships, we're making sure that all of those relationships that we have with others are based in equality and respect. We're making sure that they are healthy and there's healthy communication happening in them, because this is our opportunity to model healthy relationships. And relationships don't just refer to romantic or sexual relationships, right? Friendships are types of relationships. Family members have relationships with each other. Professional relationships exist. So we just want to make sure that in all of those opportunities, we are modeling healthy communication and respect. And so for my school-based folks, the way you talk about your colleagues or talk to your colleagues in front of students has an impact. It matters. The way you talk to your students matters, because we're modeling how we expect others to respond if they're being disrespected or not, right? And then for my young people in the audience, this is your opportunity to show that the people that you have relationships with, your friends, your partners, you can model respect and healthy communication. And recognizing that that's easier said than done, we do have a couple of handouts. So Bree is going to show one, and this is so we have this in English and in Spanish. The English one says space, in Spanish, espacio. And so these are tips for having a healthy parent or guardian and child relationship. And then for this is our charm handout. And in Spanish, I believe it's atraer. And so these are our key ingredients for healthy relationships that we can use with our friends, for healthy friendships, and also with our partners. So another way we can do relationship level prevention is engaging our classes, parent groups, like friend circles, our teams, our clubs, anywhere that we have just a small cohort of folks. Those are our relationship level people. When we're in small groups, our family groups, our friend groups, our classrooms can be our relationship level or opportunities to start the discussion and shift the culture in our small units of people to be more towards relationships built on equality and respect, and instead of power and control. And so in addition to just engaging these small groups, these teams and clubs in talking about this, you can also request prevention education from professionals. So at the TDV committee, we as a committee collaborated and created this pamphlet that if you're at a San Diego school, if you're at a middle school or high school in San Diego County, this is county-wide, then your school principals, your advisors, your nurses, your social workers, counselors, wellness coordinators should have received in-person copies of this. However, you all are going to have access to the virtual version, so don't worry if you haven't seen the in-person copy of this. But this is the folks in San Diego County, or this is county-wide, North County, South Bay, everything in the middle to the east. We cover those locales. And so these are the folks represented on the TDV committee who offer generally free programming to public schools and different healthy relationships education. And so this is prevention education. A lot of us do. We offer one-time educations, but we also offer series-based educations where we can come back repeatedly to reinforce our topics and wide ranges of topics. Definitely check out this prevention pamphlet if you are interested in requesting. All of the contact information for the different organizations is on the pamphlet. So take a look at it, browse it, and if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us or the organizations listed there.
So now looking at community level prevention, first understanding what counts as community. So obviously today we are focusing a little bit on schools, and that's a great place to do community level prevention, but there are also other places if you're connected to your neighborhood, cultural or identity-based groups, or religious groups, any kind of larger group of people. So not, remember on relationship, we had like families or friend groups. Here we're expanding our scope a little bit to schools, neighborhoods, and larger shared groups. And community level prevention is where we really want to start shifting norms. We want to start creating a culture that condemns violence and has consent and respect as the norm. So how can you engage in community level prevention? Well, one thing you can do is get involved in Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month, or TDV, and that is coming up in February, super soon. One thing you can do is follow the Teen Dating Violence Committee's virtual campaign. So you have a link to our folder that has information in there, and we're going to have a lot of great stuff that you can follow along with. For example, we have some Zoom backgrounds, right? So we are engaging in a virtual world right now, so you can use these Zoom backgrounds that are themed for Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. We've got a fun video one here that is really cute. We've got a few others on here, and as well in this folder, you can find workshops that are open for folks to attend and free, so that are themed on these topics we've been talking about today around healthy relationships and consent, boundaries, respect, all the kinds of things we've been talking about today. And you can follow along with the Teen Dating Violence Committee's events for one way to engage in community level prevention. You can also plan your own campaign or your own events. So attending and creating virtual events for your community, dedicating club meetings or class time to discuss healthy relationships is another great way to start working on that community level prevention. You can also follow along with these other guides that have been created by other entities. So for example, the Outrage into Action DIY guide is linked here. That's actually the one from 2020. So make sure that if you're looking at that one, you're not following along with the dates specifically, but you can use that as inspiration to plan your own events and your own campaign if you choose to do so. And it's also really important that even though it's an awareness month, that we do go beyond awareness, right? Like that's what we're talking about today, and start to incorporate prevention. So for example, we wanted to share with you some work that was done by the Close to Home Youth Leadership Team at Hoover High School last year. So here are some photos from the event. The Youth Leadership Team is a community organizing group. It's facilitated by the Center for Community Solutions, but it is a youth leadership team, meaning the youth are the leaders of this event and of the work that they do together. So what we have here, and obviously this was in a pre-COVID situation, so I know that these in-person events are not really possible right now, but we can draw inspiration from this still. We had these young folks who decided to put on this healthy relationships and consent education initiative at Hoover High School. They set up tables where they had activities to educate their peers about all these topics. They facilitated and designed the activities themselves, which is great. Peer-to-peer education is such an effective way to approach this. They also coordinated with the principal in order to incentivize participation, which is a really great way to work on this, whatever incentivizing participation might look like in your space, whether it's extra credit in a school setting or providing food to young people. That's a great way to draw people in if it's possible to gather in spaces, which it's not really right now. But whatever incentivizing participation looks like, getting as many people as you can out here and learning about healthy relationships is a great way to do community level prevention.
And something that I think is great about this model as well is that what we know about teen dating violence is that young people tend to not talk to adults about relationships. And we can, of course, do our best to become caring, trustworthy, supportive adults, so that if a young person does talk to us about their relationships and needs support, we can be that person. But we also need to think about how are we empowering young people to do the work so that they can be the supportive people to their friends, because more often than not, they're going to talk to their friends about it first before reaching out to an adult. So I think this is a great model that the young people were not only the ones who designed the event, but they also were the ones leading it, teaching their peers about healthy relationships and and consent and all that. And I love that model. I think it's great. Shout out to Close to Home. So on to onto our last rung of the social ecological model. I do this hand motion because I'm like individual, relationship, community, societal. And so societal level prevention. What counts as societal? Spaces that have impact across communities. So if we're thinking of our school communities as, as our community level, then something that goes across schools could be considered societal. I know societal tends to bring about the mind of like national or global, and it definitely can mean that, right? Because we have national legislation that impacts, entire countrywide initiatives. But we could also think of, something that's San Diego County-wide could be considered societal because it's spanning so many different communities. A school district-wide initiative could count as societal because it's impacting so many different school communities specifically. And types of societal level prevention can include impacting legislation, impacting media, and impacting social norms. So some examples, impacting TDV legislation. That can look like participating in virtual town halls and school board meetings and letting folks know, hey, we want healthy relationships education. We want to make sure that funding is prioritized for this type of education. We want to make sure that we have protocols in place so that when our schools are made aware of teen dating violence happening on campus, we know exactly what to do and we know exactly how to support that student. Letter writing and calling your legislators. Every year there's a budget that's released that does or does not include funding for relationships and healthy relationships prevention education or sexual violence and teen dating violence prevention education in the state. And unfortunately, as of January 2021, a budget was just released from the governor's office that did not include funding for prevention education. And so it's important to let our legislators know that this is important to us. And so leading a letter writing campaign or, a tweeting campaign or a call bank, a phone bank of folks who are, we're all gonna get together. I'm envisioning a post-COVID time when that is safe, but we're all gonna get together, have pizza, and then call 3 legislators and then watch a movie. That's an idea for a societal, a way to engage in societal level prevention. If you're old enough to vote, voting with your values, voting for elected officials and school board members who value and prioritize comprehensive sex education that includes healthy relationships education. In 2016, California passed the California Healthy Youth Act, which essentially has put into law that all middle schoolers and high schoolers should receive comprehensive sex education at least once in middle school and once in high school. That includes curriculum that is affirming to LGBTQIA+ folks, which, as we learned, is a protective factor, right, to promote more acceptance and affirmation around gender. To have healthy relationships education and human trafficking prevention education and sexual violence prevention education and consent education as a part of this all this comprehensive sex ed. So, making sure that we're actually enacting that and that we're meeting those standards. Another opportunity for societal level prevention is the statewide coalition that does relationship violence work in California. Is called California Partnership to End Domestic Violence, CPEDV. And every February, so even if you're watching this, past February 2021, this happens every year during Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month, and it's called Orange Day. And it's an event in Sacramento. For 2021, it's going to be a virtual event in the second week of February. And young people are invited to come speak at the Capitol, speak to legislators. And here we have a photo of one of the students who was participating in Close to Home in 2020, who helped organize that Hoover High event. And she was invited to the Capitol to speak directly to legislators to talk about how important prevention ed funding is to her community. And so all youth have this opportunity to get involved really directly and speak directly to legislators And I think because 2021 it is going to be virtual, I think that that is a great way to, to start off. You can still be local and still participate at this event happening in our state's capital. Beyond legislation, another way to engage in societal level prevention is engaging with media and social norms. So if you are a teacher or a club supervisor or a student who is in, in some sort of creative program, so that could be the school newspaper, it could be media content creation, it could be website design, art, anything, then you have a really unique opportunity to for Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month to create a project that's related to healthy relationships, consent, etc. Because creating and supporting media that promotes healthy relationships and promotes healthy social norms is a part of changing our society's culture with how we view and think about and prevent teen dating violence.
So we've given you a ton of information about prevention today, and it can be a little bit overwhelming. So I want you all to remember that you are not alone. There's no need to reinvent the wheel when it comes to healthy relationships education and violence prevention. There are so many resource guides and campaign templates that already exist. And you can always reach out to the TDV committee for support. Our contact information will be at the end. Anyone on the committee will be happy to support any initiatives you might have to do events for Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month, or beyond that, if you are hoping to continue your prevention work beyond that, or host classes or anything like that. We shared some resources for that. There's so much out there and so much support for you in San Diego County. And also, I want to emphasize that it is okay to engage at whichever level of the social ecological model that works best for you, right? So maybe for some of you, the individual level and relationship level seems like super attainable, but maybe the other ones don't. Maybe for some of you, it's the opposite. Totally okay. We're not saying that you have to do every single thing on this list. We just want to make the resources available to you so that whichever part of this is helpful to you, that you can engage with that. We appreciate you doing whatever you can to support teen dating violence prevention.
And so just before we finish up, we do want to mention that just as there's a whole bunch of prevention resources out there, there are also a lot of survivor support services out there. But locally in San Diego, we do have a lot of confidential support services that are available. But I think is really important for folks to know, especially young folks to know, is that at least for Center for Community Solutions, I don't want to speak for these other organizations, though I imagine that they have very similar protocols to our own agency. But at CCS, we serve survivors ages 13 and up. And if you are over the age of 13, you do not need parental or guardian consent to seek our services. And if you are between the ages of 6 years old and 12 years old, then you can still seek our services with parental or guardian guidance. But just so you know that option is out there. You can seek out advocacy, which is having a designated advocate who can help walk you through your options, which I think is really helpful to a lot of people. You have access to legal services and legal advocacy, counseling, and just a lot of support that's out there and available. And so some of our local resources, we have Center for Community Solutions, which serves countywide, the Community Resource Center, which is based in North County coastal area, the Family Justice Center, which is based, I believe, in downtown San Diego, South Bay Community Services, or SBCS, which serves South Bay, and WRC, which is also up in North County. And so when you get these slides, you have access to all of these links, and you'll have access to all of their phone numbers here. So it's a bad time to have something stuck in my eye in a recorded video, but so all these confidential local support services are available to you. And then our national resources include the DV hotline, which have these websites have chat advocacy available So that, I think that's really extra important during, you know, remote learning and COVID times, just because it can be tough to call someone and have privacy to call someone, especially if you're living in a crowded space where you just don't have that opportunity. So you can go online and chat with someone directly, or you can call their numbers. And Love is Respect is another national organization that we love to direct folks to. They also have that online chat advocacy available, as well as a texting line, as well as a calling line. So all of these services available. I want to point out that you can call these numbers, you can seek out support if you yourself have experienced relationship violence, or if you are supporting someone who is, you know, if you are the support person supporting someone else, or if you have questions, if you're an educator and you aren't sure where to start, all of these are available to you. So this is our teen dating violence email. If you have any questions, comments, thoughts about this presentation, you want a sounding board, you want to reach out to us, go ahead and send us an email at teendv.sddvc@gmail.com. And as promised, we will be uploading these slides that have all of the links, clickable and interactive, at this tinyurl.com/TDVAM2021 toolkit. So TDVAM 2021 toolkit. But thank you very much for joining us for this past hour, and
good luck with your Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month events.
Yeah, if you are, just a reminder, if you are watching this after February or in the middle of February, Teen DVAM happens every February. So if you missed it for 2021, then there's always the opportunity to come back to it in 2022 and the years later.
Mm-hmm. And of course, while there's concerted, efforts to have events and workshops and stuff like that in February, there's also events and social media and classes and all that kind of stuff to engage with year round. So you can always contact us at the email on the screen if you want to know about that outside of February too.
All right, well, thank you for joining us, and go forth and prevent.